All right, sharp-eyed viewers, once again detecting it's not just me on the screen. I'm joined today by James Bacon of Bacon Gaming, and we're here to talk about what we like to talk about here on this channel, have an RPG conversation about RPGs as RPGs. But first, James, could you let us know, about your channel and why you started it?
Sure. The channel was started to sort of just get my ideas out there. Um, for a while now, I've been wanting to get a channel up and running, and it was really I was procrastinating. I want to get a YouTube channel up and running. Oh, but I need a better computer. Oh, I need a microphone, or I need lighting, or I need a desk, or I need. And then eventually, I got to a point where, and this is after participating in um, the chats of other channels. I would get so frustrated. And this is no, I'm not slighting anyone here at all. It's just the nature of chat is that you constantly get overlooked. There's not really a whole lot you can do about it. And it reached a boiling point where it was like, okay, you know what? It's Sunday. I have all day off. I'm just going to make my first video and get it out there. I don't need a new desk. I don't need lighting. All I need to do is to turn on the camera and do it. And so that's what I started doing. It's not anything that there's no plan here. It's just me getting ideas out there and seeing if they jive with anyone or seeing if they don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to refine my philosophy or framework or idea or and that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like I'm not I'm not the dogmatic sort. I have ideas, but I'm not the dogmatic sort. And I hope that comes across, and I hope that has been coming across.
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you, why I was interested in speaking with you, because what I could hear about the way that you were working through your questions to yourself and the way you're addressing your audience makes conversation possible. Uh,
Hmm.
these are ideas that are forming, or they're observations that may feel complete or incomplete, and through interaction some value can be gained
Hmm.
rather than a formal and fractious debate about how the other person is wrong, or, well, have you considered this, that kind of stuff, which is
Yeah.
tedious. Yeah. So you had posted a video, your emerging thoughts on role-playing
Hmm.
games, and during that video you were,
A now poorly titled video.
well,
In my view, I didn't mean to trip you up. I apologize.
I don't want to look back over the many titles I've had on my videos,
I
and especially
gotcha.
the really long ones that scroll off the edge of the screen. So people say, "Isn't that the same title from the video before?" But the the essence there was, I've got these ideas. If I'm right about them, let me know. If they seem wrong, let me know, or at least you know come talk to me, and let's push and pull on these ideas. So that's what I thought we could do, is
Yes.
push and pull on the ideas. So last week you had a chat with Ivan Mike from the Ivan Mike 1968 channel,
Hmm.
and talked a lot about the the three creative agendas as described by the Forge when they looked at the earlier work of GDS, which I guess we could say observes and tries to expose some of the major creative impulses or intentions that we have when we play. And that conversation got into things like the suitability or the unsuitability of the term, or the usefulness or the lack of usefulness of the whole idea. And I think where I want to start is saying, I think it's a really good idea to read all of these theories, or however you want to phrase them. I think it's a really good idea to become conversant with the different ways people have looked at what we do. But I'd like to push all of that to the side and talk about what it is that, if you're playing in your perfect group, right? No specific personalities, but in a harmonious group,
Hmm.
what does that look like? What is that experience for you? Big question.
Heck of a question. Um,
So let's break it down even simpler. What would you be doing as a primary activity? Now the temptation is to say, well, we would be role playing, but
right.
what would you
What does
actually be
that mean?
doing? Yeah,
Okay.
what would you be doing?
Um, so I think that, and I just recently was in a like a 4D role playing training session, you know, and based on that, I think that my ideal gaming group or session would be, you would be in character as frequently as possible, speaking in first person. That doesn't mean acting. You can speak in your
No,
natural
you
cadences.
you're
Not
you're being
asking anyone.
clear, right?
Right.
Especially on this channel, you're being clear. Like we strip away the branding, the 4D branding, or
Yes.
we play in character, or we're fantasy adventure gamers. So you strip all that exclusionary, obfuscating language
Right.
away.
Right.
I'm going to speak in character. That's not a an opaque statement.
Right. Right.
Don't worry about it.
So
You're gonna be speaking in character.
I
You're gonna
want
be
to
in
I want
character
to
most of the
speak
time.
in. Okay. So I want to speak in character, and I want to describe what my character is doing. But I think I prefer to be able to break character to seek clarity, because cue taking is an extremely difficult thing to orchestrate. So when I
Sure.
say cue taking, I mean when it's my turn and I am in character and I'm describing my action. And it's really easy to turn to someone and say, "Hey, I'm speaking. This is what I'm saying. I'm in first person." It is an entirely different thing to, in character, wonder how much water you have left in your flask
Right. An
and try
example you
to
talked about with
describe.
Ivan. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the example that I talked about with Ivan, and it's the most clear one that I have because it's the very first example that I asked for,
Sure. And there's
from
lots.
people who. Yeah, there are
The
lots. There are
the
lots,
game
but I feel
master
like.
is portraying two different individuals.
Mhm.
They're not they don't have a different fake voice for the individuals, and at a
Right,
certain moment it may become unclear which person is talking, and there's no way to ask in character
right.
of the two people
What's your
standing
name
in front of
again?
you.
Who am I talking
Oh,
to? Yeah. And I
yeah.
find that, and maybe it's just lack of practice, but there's a comfort level that comes along with that. Or I mean, it's certainly, I was definitely uncomfortable trying to sort of feel my way through the session. Now, I was told that I did very well, but I feel otherwise. I feel like I was not so well. I feel like I was a little uncomfortable in some places. And
So
this
it was a
is.
little like work.
Yes, yes. And it was at no fault of the GM. It was not like they were
No,
doing an extremely good job. I'm not, there's no blame here. Just this is my
no.
experience and how I feel I performed. So I
But the
appreciate.
thing that you were doing
Hmm.
was a certain amount different than what you normally do.
Yes. Yes.
So there
Because there
was
was,
discomfort.
yes, there was when I entered into this session, I decided, this was never said to me, I decided to attempt to tamp down any questions that I might have seeking clarity, or whatever they might have been for, out of character, and try to sort of propose those in an in character style. And
Sure.
now what it did help me do is that it did help me
That's
be,
from a blog post I wrote about 12 years ago.
what the
That notion of making the effort to transform your characters to or transform your questions into in character statements,
oh, sure, okay, yeah,
hey GM, how far away is the bridge? To how far away do you think the bridge is?
right,
That this is familiar territory. Don't worry about it.
yeah. And there was an NPC there who could help me along. I was a fighter, the NPC was a mage, and so I could turn to the mage and say, hey, what are these runes? What do you think of this? I'm in the middle of combat. I need help. Like, I could turn to the NPC and say those sorts of things, which was good because it was definitely like babies first, right? It was just me. There was no other party members. And so the GM kind of provided this NPC. Now, it was definitely it was an observation. They wanted to see how I interacted with the NPC, but at the same
Sure.
time, it made easing into the session easier because I could just turn to the NPC and say, hey, could you please cast a fireball? Or what do you think of these runes? Or how do you think we open this chest? Or whatever it might have been.
Right.
But I
Practice.
still
Practice
feel
is good.
like it. Yes, practice is very good, and another thing that I talked about with Ivan is that the assumption is that people who role play want to get better at their craft. Um, and so I came to begin to think about role play, and well, I'll wait for you to ask questions. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that's my
But no,
perfect.
I don't know that that is a tangent. You had this experience, which was slightly different from your normal experience in some ways, and maybe
Mhm,
very different in other ways, which left you with questions.
mhm,
It didn't leave
yes,
you with, well, I liked this part, I didn't like that part. It left you with some questions and a feeling of some discomfort or unease about how
yes,
well you had done.
exactly. It was unease on my performance. I was questioning, you know, how I could have better approached any given in character situation to have been, more in character, more proactive, that sort of thing. And these are
Sure.
questions that I should be asking, right?
Right.
So no
If you
mistake, I
want to
should
get
be asking
better.
the question.
Yeah.
But if I want to get
At the
better
thing. Yeah.
at the thing, um, but do I want to get better at the thing?
Well,
Um,
how would you know without practicing enough to remove the discomfort of
yes,
unfamiliarity? So
yes.
now you're familiar and you're capable. Do you still enjoy it? There's only only one way to answer that question. Yeah.
Right. And at this moment, I don't know yet. I do intend to continue to participate, but if I can do a little, I guess it's not really plugging, but in the week to come, there's Runehammer is putting on their
Hmm.
Rune Jammer. I think it's an annual sort of event that they do, and I have two seats, or I should say, I have one seat at two different tables. One is for the Index Card RPG Cthulhu Hack, and the other one is for a Crown and Skull game. Um, and I don't imagine they're going to play very much like a 4D sort of entirely in character because the idea is there to be um, educational. They want you to learn the games. They want you to experience their games and
Right, it's a different
hopefully come
experience.
away with a sale or yeah. So they want that experience to be as good as possible. So I think that there will be a lot of probably out of character interaction between GMs and players and whatnot, just for the sake of clarity.
Yeah.
Um, and that at the in this moment here, after only having played in one game, as I've described, I think I prefer that style of play. I prefer the the permission, I'll phrase it, to to ask a question out of character or something along those lines.
Sure.
Um, Now, what I have to do is come to terms with whether or not that denigrates the role play experience. Um, and that's why I sort of have constantly been like, the way that I'm trying to describe it, I guess I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, right? I'm trying to say that whatever your experience is, the experience that you want to have through role play,
Yeah.
you have to, I mean, there's going to be a give and take, right? So there are going to be times when you want extremely crunchy tables or a lot of dice rolling, like there's going to be times, because that's the best way to handle that given situation. There's going to be a trade-off, right? Because if you're constantly checking tables, you're going to be pulled out of character. Or if you're constantly having to set up a scene like in Trollbane, you're going to be pulled out of character. Is that okay? And does
If
that
so,
make
how
the
much?
activity
Yeah.
right? If so, how much? Does that make the activity not role playing? Is that just another facet of role playing? So I think there's like, and I don't want to get into a habit of like redefining already commonly used words. That's an absolute nightmare.
It's a
I'm not
it's a trap. Yeah.
yes,
It's a trap.
right. So I'm not trying to do that. I just want to sort of, I want to get ideas out there. I want to understand. Um,
Sure. And be understood, you know. I think that that second half of the coin is important too, because if your ideas are, let's say, independently corroborated by a stranger,
mhm.
it gives them that, I don't know, that weight that, yeah, okay, what I'm doing is is balanced in some way. Like that
Mhm.
totally different set of people came across the same principles, playing some of the same and some different games than I did. So perhaps my observations are in some way accurate. I think
Mhm.
it's an important part of, like, this is what I think. I need to be able to express it clearly so someone else can understand, but it's nice to hear it back in the same way it's nice to hear totally opposing ideas so that you can fill up the space of the idea better. So
Yes.
pushing back
Yes.
against it to find what where the line really is.
Yes. Yes. With that, I
All
agree for
right.
sure.
So I mean, I traveled a similar road when I started playing with different people in different ways. You know, it brought, you know, what is a role playing game into mind,
Hmm.
and and with games being so differently, even in the early days when I moved away from my first game into other games, it became pretty obvious that system matters
Yes.
as one element. But what I'd already noticed was that the players matter and the environment matters. Like everything about it, you know, has its influence on your play in the moment.
Yes.
And then those experiences have an influence on your play, you know, as an aggregate or as a style. All right. So
Yes.
I was playing during the Satanic Panic. Couldn't play at home, so we played walking to school. We played in stairwells. We played, you know, in low voices, talking in the corner of the in the basement, or you know, out in the tool shed. Or
You know, I was expressing an interest during the Satanic Panic. I was unfortunately, I was my mother in particular. I love my mother. This is not.
Sure.
I'm not. You know, but it was a tough pill for her to swallow to see my interest in Dungeons and Dragons, and so I wasn't able to. I was able to get a monster manual for, I think it was either second or third edition. I can't remember, for my birthday. Like I was able to get that. Um, but then I sort of got into later on World of Darkness, and that was just a hard no in my household. So I bought my own books, and I had to keep them on me at all times to make sure that they weren't discovered while I was at school or anything like that. It was a whole thing. So I'm there with you on that.
All right. So, you know, that showed me the environmental factors and playing when you could with who you could instead of who you really wanted to, and you know, in comfort and all these things, they influenced how I started thinking about games. So for the activity, if we strip it right down, I mean, what are we left with? Regardless of this part of play is role play or this part of play is not role play. When we're playing something with role playing game on the book, like vampire, for example. If we're playing
Mhm.
vampire, what is the act of play? Another big question.
Yeah. So, what is the act of play?
So, we sit down and say, now we're playing.
Right. It is a it's a personal experience in a group setting. And I've said
True.
this on some of my other videos, but I think that it is, especially with something like Vampire, where they do the whole personal horror because you are a monster, and it's a matter of setting the mechanics up against your player morality. Because in character, you have to do dreadful things to survive, or to be able to, to be able to, you need blood to be able to use your abilities. You have to collect blood in, the typical vampire way. And so that becomes necessary to point the game in that direction to achieve that experience. Um, and so that's why I say it's an individual experience or a personal experience, because that's all internal. But
Right.
it's in a group setting. So knowing that you've all come there to do the same thing, you have to interact with each other. So the act of play is both considering the internal monologue and the thoughts of your character that you've created, while at the same time, based on those considerations, performing actions in character in the group in order to achieve a personal goal or motivation that you might have. That's what I
Right.
would
And the
say the
game was
act of
set
play.
up to make your personality, the core part of your personality, obvious to you and others,
Yes.
and help suggest goals and motivations in your clan, and all these things influenced the the in character stance of that individual, that fictional individual, or as I like to say, the imagined. Right. So the imagined situation, the imagined personality. Right.
Yes.
All of this part that you've described is is your experience of the unreal parts of play,
Yes.
that personal experience, that internal experience, the things that you are imagining. So that's not the complete picture, though.
No, it's not. And
you
once you
you
said
touched on
imagine,
it.
like, oh yeah, there it is.
Once
Um,
you touched on it because you said in the group setting. So how
yes.
does that get out there?
Through description, through conversation, through, I mean, narration.
Well, it
I
might be
was,
narration. Yeah.
well, I was just someone who I've been interacting with recently, just in DMs and whatnot, just having conversations or in comments. He posted what I think is his first video on role playing. Um, and he said that he calls role playing games narrative games because everything in the game happens through narration, whether it's in first person or third person. And I was sort of, at
As a
first you
writer,
kind
that
of,
threw you a little bit, right?
right. It's like, hey, well, hold on, let me think about this. That's not necessarily wrong. So it's sort of, I guess, man, what this is a huge question. Or that's not a huge question. It's a very specific question. So I need to answer it
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't mean to like be dropping bombs, but I find that
it's
kind of
very
question
helpful.
gives you the impetus to
Yes,
find. Yeah.
I completely agree with you, and I appreciate the question, and it's something that needs to be answered. Um, and so, what does play look like? So, play looks
Yeah.
like getting together in a group, physically or virtually. I think,
Right.
though I would prefer physically. I get
Sure.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
necessity of being virtual. So, getting together in a group of people in order to create a shared fiction and narrate that fiction together
Together.
while also experiencing the headspace of someone who's not you.
All
I
right,
think
that's
that's
interesting.
what it I think that's what it gets down to.
So what about system?
Ah, man, it's like every time I come up with a solution, there's another problem. Okay, there does need to be a system.
Okay.
There does need to be a GM. I know there are GM-less games. I know there are more
Sure.
player-facing
But we're talking
games.
about your
Right,
ideal. Yeah.
right. I think there does need to be a GM. There does need to be an arbiter because it's very important for those NPCs to have, a face. So,
So there's a game master and there's a system.
yes.
Do you have a because in your ideal system, going
Mhm.
in and out of character is not a problem. You don't feel a particular stress or loss when you're shifting, right? You shift out
As
to
long
ask a
as it's not done
clarification
hyper
question.
frequently. Yeah, like, I don't want to sit down at a table and feel like I'm just doing some kind of accounting for having to go to tables so many times. That is not
Sure.
something that I feel is
As an
good or
example.
conducive to role play.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Um,
let's actually talk about that one for a second. You
okay,
raised
sure.
a cool example from vampire. Vampires need blood in order to be
Do.
vampires,
Yes, yes.
right? And the game called itself a game of personal horror. And some critiques leveled against the game was that I never felt any personal horror.
Right.
And you might ask, why not? Like, why did the writers feel confident calling it a game of personal horror? And why did they think they had created a game of personal horror if a large number of players didn't have that experience? What's different between the two groups? What alchemy is going on here that is not going on there?
I think the difference is likely going to be, and I can say that absolutely I have shared an opinion similar to that before. Like, oh, I didn't experience any personal harm. But if you sit down and really think about it, right? A lot of times when you were playing a game of vampire, if you did, there were times where you would have to go and feed in order to get blood. And really what it came down to was it's downtime. Okay, I'm going to go get blood. Okay, I roll my 10-sided dice. That's how many blood
Out of
points you get.
character
Okay, and when I get.
conversation and a simple die
Right,
roll.
right. That is skipping over probably the most poignant moment to grasp that personal horror. Because if you met someone on the street in the game and then that NPC was given a name and they were given a motivation and you had to interact with them, and like that would really be where the personal horror comes in. And I think, unfortunately, especially due to, at the very least, my age, right, when I was playing the game, because I was in high school when I was
Yeah,
first playing the game. It was real easy to just be like, okay, I get 4 blood points. Ah, dang, I wish it were more, and then you move on.
forgetting the corpse in the alleyway. Yeah,
Right, forgetting the corpse in the alleyway because it doesn't matter. But if you really did make it matter, if you really did role play that scenario, it becomes stomach turning, or it can become stomach turning. And I think that is really where the personal horror of that game is present. And I think
sure.
that it was maybe miscommunicated in the mechanics, or it was just not, there was something there that just was easy to gloss over. And it kind of shouldn't have been.
Sure. I mean, uh, we don't need to get into page count and all that stuff to
Right,
understand
right.
how those kind of mistakes could be made. But I think one important part is that our view of how we play and what we like and what our preferences are, what our biases lead us toward, can, even when we consider it from the point of view of writing a game or giving instructions or giving advice, we can be quite unaware of all of the things that we do in a given activity. And
Hmm.
I think they communicated that the game was about personal horror to carry this example forward, but they didn't really, especially in the early versions of it, they didn't really spend a lot of pages talking about you should imagine this.
Yes, I agree with that.
From time to time, feeding should be like this instead of only this. If
Yes,
you want to have personal horror, I think
yes,
they just assumed that everyone would play like they did.
yes.
They
Well, it's a role playing game.
quickly
You're running
learned
a role
that
play.
people wouldn't.
I need blood. Chuck a dice. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I got.
So then, if we look at a superhero game, if we look at a pulp heroics game, if we look at an old style science fiction game of exploration and trade, or if we look at a laser swords and wizardry and space kind of game, there are going to be different things that the game requires from us,
Hmm.
in order to meet it in its sweet spot. And that's just one of the elements. There's the people that I'm playing with in the way that I'm playing with them in the location. All those things
Yes.
matter. So how much can that be anything more than personal preference? How often do we roll the dice? How often can we go out of character? How many or what type of questions can we ask?
That is personal preference, I think. And I've even talked about it in such a way.
Yeah,
Um, Now, I'm a very, I'm not, I've only begun my journey into understanding what GNS is or GDS, the threefold model. I've only begun that. And so
sure.
everything that I've said up to this point is really based on a non comprehensive understanding. I've had to be corrected about what was meant about simulationism or narrativism. So, um, given that, I have called those things, the simulationism or the narrativism or the gamism, preferences, right? It's just a matter of, and I've said this in several videos, I think now,
I
at
think so.
least two, where, if someone prefers to chuck dice, okay, they prefer to chuck dice. That's, but so I don't think there's really, I think that's okay, right? Like it's okay to have a preference to chuck dice. It's okay to have a preference to want to stay in character as frequently as possible. And so,
Right.
there's a balance that has to take place, right? And so the framework, I guess, that I've been considering and kicking around, sort of trying to put, better voice to, it's all a bunch of it's everything influences everything else. Okay,
Yeah,
so the it all starts with the experience that you want. What experience do you want when you role play? Do you want an
exactly.
experience of being a vampire? Do you want an experience of being a pirate? Do you want an experience of being a stable master? Do you want an experience of being a space wizard with a laser sword, right? That's where it starts. From there, you find like minded individuals who want to share that experience.
Yeah,
And that should be supported by the role play. So the role play, the imagining this collaborative, fictitious world and occupying the headspace of these imaginary characters that you create, that should support whatever experience you're after, right? But there's other contributors to the role play. So there's going to be a game element, right? Which I'm going to call the systems. There is a system, there
yeah.
is a setting, and there is drama. And I think the players themselves, the role play is the plot. So whatever they are doing, that is the plot, period, full stop. That has to be supported by the game, pardon me, by the system. I'm
It's
confusing.
it's
I'm
fine. It's
confusing my
fine.
terms. I apologize. I promise I'll get it straight
But
one day.
the
Um,
idea is clear, right?
yes,
The things that those characters that you're imagining that you want to experience, the things that they should be able to do, the system needs to support that.
yes, yes, but it needs to support it in relation to the other things. So it's not enough if it really, and this is where the sort of the preference comes in, right? Because if you want a high degree of in character role play, you really have to back off on the dice, or you really have to back off on um, the particulars of the world, the setting in which you're participating, right? So, and the system that we used on Sunday when I was playing in the game was Traveler, Mongoose Traveler Second Edition,
Hmm.
because the dice are all the same, so it's only ever 2d6. You add your different modifiers to it, and it becomes a very quick thing. So I will say I want to do this action, or I will describe myself doing this action, right? And so I will either get silence from the GM, which means I can go ahead and do it, or I will get a roll. And depending on the level of the roll, like I want to push against this solid stone door to see if I can open the tomb. Okay, well, that's a 10 up. So roll your two six-sided dice. So, but it becomes a very, very diminished system,
Sure.
right? It's
The
literally just
tool
chucking
using
2d6.
the tool using to minimize the switching cost is to make the communication of those game details as efficient as possible, so that
Yes.
we can rise up out of the in character focus of attention. Right, we rise up out of that. We pay attention briefly to the system, and then it's very easy to pick up all those details we were paying attention to again, to reassert
Right.
that imagined situation. That's one
Yes.
way to handle that. Right.
It is. It is.
Um,
There are definitely other ways to handle it. The point here really being that each of these aspects of, you know, what we commonly refer to as a role playing game need to strike a balance with each other.
for the intention
Um,
of the group. Yes.
yes. Yes. So that's really
Uh,
kind of what I'm getting at.
One experience that I've had, because I'm running this long going campaign of Call of Cthulhu, and we're sharing it online, and
The
that's
one
one
with
of the
Ivan.
basic, the one with Ivan. Yeah.
Okay, I watched a couple episodes.
So one of the principles there is to minimize rolls in exactly the way that you are describing, and so the effect is there. You can see when rolls are waived. You can see when rolls are called for using coded language.
Hmm.
Right? So no one says in an out of character, non-diegetic way, right? Roll the dice, right? It's just all, and we can see, okay, roll, and you're rolling this for this reason, and failure means this. So it's all there, uh, demonstrated in one
Hmm.
episode or another, one session or another. But one experience that I've had is that there are some systems where that interruption of the dice to the ability to hang on to your imagination of the imagined situation actually works to enhance the situation. Like in I don't know if you've ever played a Palladium game, or
I am
uh,
familiar with Palladium. I've never played a Palladium game.
doesn't really matter, but the way that is set up, much like original RuneQuest was set up, or the way Mithras is set up now, is that a roll isn't an amount of time with a degree of success, right? It's not like a 1 minute combat round and a whole
Right.
bunch of actions have taken place within that 1 minute, and the dice tells you how overall successful you were. One roll is one action. And so when systems designed like that are in play, you can kind of see the body language of the players changing if they are the type to engage, to focus their attention to the point where immersion starts to be on the table. I mean, I think what usually gets called immersion is just playing in character,
Hmm.
right? But if you pay sufficient attention to an idea long enough, it begins to exclude the other details. And now we're starting to talk about the immersive experience. So you can see these people who are rolling the dice, they're not rolling dice. Their attention is focused on that punch or that grab or that dodge, and you can see these muscle twitches and realize that there's more going on, right? And it's because of the system, not prevented by the system in those cases. So it's really kind of interesting how, as you said, each detail matters. Who we're playing with, how we're playing with them, like the environment of play, the actual game that we're using, the way that we're using the game, to the game's best advantage, or changing some aspect of the game for some preference that we're bringing to the game.
Yes.
Like, I want to use these rules, but not those rules. I want to use this part of the setting, but not that part of the setting. These characters, types, occupations, classes, whatever, are allowed. These ones are not. Whatever elements we bring to the game, they all matter, which means before play, we need to talk with each other.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So it's all about talking.
It is.
So I think
It's
Ivan
about
mentioned the Holy
proposition and
Trinity.
agreement and questioning and
Yeah,
answering. Yes, it's all about talking. I agree.
yeah. Ivan had mentioned, I think, the Holy Trinity. Talk with the players, play the right game, be part of the solution, right? And and it's funny how often it comes down to those kinds of things. But so in your ideal game, right? We're not talking about solo play. That's less satisfying than your ideal, which includes a game master.
Yes. I'd argue
And
that solo play also includes a game master, but we can,
yeah, it's
you are
you,
the game
right?
master.
Yeah.
You are the game master that now just also has a player character, I would argue.
Yeah. But that experience is fundamentally different than being able to communicate with someone else, right?
Yes.
Because that solo experience of play is a lot of conceiving of what is the question I need to resolve. How do I resolve it? Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard it put that it's kind of like shadow boxing, right? So it's okay, it gets you part of the way there, but it's not, my ideal experience because there's a
Right.
lot contributed by a game master, contributed by other players. There's a lot
Fellow
of
player. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of unexpected things that happen, things that you would never have thought of in the moment, that become, very interesting in how play unfolds.
Yeah. I find solo play, not the by myself play, but the one player, one game master play. I find that
Okay.
tends to have a stronger dose of what I'm looking for usually, right? The ability to have the experience of the character,
Hmm.
but the experience of enacting my will as the character is much stronger when I have a partner. Like when we are communicating about what we are experiencing, right? So I find it hard to choose between that very intense imagined experience where I don't need to describe as much, or I don't need to do things that the character wouldn't do. And as Daniel Jones from Primeval Fantasy likes to call it, the unity of perspective. When I'm playing just as a single character with one game master, it's much that perspective is much more unified because I'm not saying I put my arm out the window, right? I just imagine
Yes.
putting my arm out the
Just
window. I
yeah.
don't need to, you know, describe it from the car. So I think that's all valuable. So the group, how do you feel about the compromise created by the group?
I think that, well, I think that it's a preference, right? And I think that provided that it is your preference to play in a group, there are compromises that must be made that you're going to have to be comfortable making. Um, and that, and this is kind of what I've been struggling recently. To go back to the conversation about, oh, you should have been here before we started recording. It's like there are compromises that you have to make in order to achieve your preferences. And there are compromises across the board, right? So even just by saying, I want to play in a group, there are going to be compromises you make to the system and the setting and the role play and the drama, because now there are other people to consider. Um, and this isn't even considering their preferences. This is just the fact of them being there.
Right.
Things change,
Exactly.
right? So if you want to have if you want to have a 4D game in a group, there are absolutely changes that will take place within the game that you're going to have to be comfortable with. You're going to have to be accepted with some, I would even call it like the cue taking and the cue giving, something I'm very bad at, both taking and giving. That becomes a pain point for me because I will communicate what I think is a cue to the GM, who will then maybe just not respond. And that's on me for not having appropriately communicated my cue. But then that, so the cue taking and giving becomes a pain point to a degree where it pulls me out of the game, right?
Sure.
So if I'm going to play in 4D, I need to make sure that I take that into account, that I need to consider that. So it's really, regardless of whatever preference you're choosing to play under, it immediately changes everything else. And the more you stack these preferences, the more changes have to be made to the surrounding support in order to really drive at the experience that you're trying to drive at.
Right. The more refined the
Yes,
experience you want, the more work has to go into framing it until we get to things like hard coded social contracts or
exactly.
whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, for my experience, where I ended up going with all of this was to kind of step away from that kind of behavior and uh, like observing or trying to theorize about that kind of behavior. This is role play. This isn't role play. We have to
Hmm.
change the name of all of these games. That, as we talked about earlier, that tends to be a
Yeah.
trap.
Yeah, and that's not something I'm trying to do at all. I don't.
Right,
I
but
don't
it
want to
happens
change some parts. Yes, it absolutely does. It does.
as we're fumbling for a handle to put on the concept. We come up with this great term. I'm going to call
Hmm.
it this. And then you discover someone else called something different that. And it's like, it doesn't mean this, it means that. And
Yeah.
it's madness. But what are the concepts? What are the things that actually happen? We have to be able to communicate with each other. Well, about what? If role playing is a conversation, what is it about? Is it for this group an out of character experience where people are free to focus on, I don't know, let's say tactical elements, right?
Sure.
Where character is a secondary concern, capacity is a primary concern. Right? So they're just going to use their own personality, their own way, but they're going to
Hmm.
be as intently focused, as engaged as an in-character player is, but with different parts of all the things that must be there
Right.
in the play.
Right. And then, the question is that any less role playing, being yourself in an imagined situation?
Me with different capacities.
Right. Is that still role play? Is it still role play? And I don't want to answer the question here
Right.
because I
Well,
don't want to be
I don't think it.
dogmatic,
I don't think
right?
it matters. It doesn't matter.
Right. I don't
Right.
think it matters at all, right?
Yeah.
I agree with that for sure. And so
Yeah.
it's well, it sure is tough to nail down. Um, but
but
it's
but
very
we don't have to.
interesting to think about. Right, right. We don't have to, and I find it very interesting to think about. These are the sorts of things that and this was really one of the major motivators for me to start a channel. It's just I just like thinking about it. Right. I
Yeah,
just want
yeah,
to put it out there, and if you agree with me, great. And if you don't, that's cool. Maybe I'll get to change my mind. Like maybe because I'm learning too, right? And I might seem just really set in a particular mindset, all the way up until that one person just goes, well, what about this? And I go, oh man, well now I have to start thinking about this whole thing over here, and is that really right?
yeah,
Because I would say a month ago, but yeah, role playing has to be someone else. It can't be yourself. That's not role play. That's just you. But what if it's you with a different capacity? What if it's you in a situation you'll never find yourself in? What if and that becomes a very interesting question to sort of extrapolate on and from.
yeah.
Um,
When I
so
play, what am I doing?
yes,
How am
what
I
am I
doing
doing?
it?
Yeah.
Who am I doing it with? How are they doing it? How they do it and how I do it when they come together, how does that change the experience? Is it pleasurable or is it not pleasurable? What can we do to make it more pleasurable? We're all going to find different answers.
Yes.
So,
Yes. I agree.
so I mean, I've come up with a framework, and I've come up with a way to conceive of the activity, and this is what I like to find in other groups or other players that I can speak with, is that they have done that too.
Okay. Well, I can't
So
say
that
I've done it, but I am working on it.
well, but sure, I don't. It's always a work in progress. I think there's
Yeah.
always new games. There's always new people, right?
Yes.
But there are people that I've played with in in my time in gaming who have never once considered the experience of play, who've not really thought about what they do when they play. They just want to show up, and they're either the type to memorize all the rules, or they're the type that always needs to be told the rules. Like that part is not consistent. But what is consistent about this kind of person is that they never really think about play on this kind of level. What is it that we do when we play? Was I satisfied by how we played rather than was I satisfied by what happened?
Yes. Yes.
You know, so that there are groups out there who have identified a lack in their play that they want to address in a specific way. This makes me happy, and I'm curious about what they saw as the lack and what they see as the solution and how well that solution worked. Right. That's what I like.
I think that I like that as well, and I've in this moment I'm endeavoring to sort of expose to become exposed to as many different styles of play with many different systems and many different settings in one shots or campaigns in order to sort of measure that, right? I want to play a game and I want to be confronted by how we played the game, and I want to be made to think about that. Well, what were we doing? Why is it what we were doing? So is this really role playing? And if it is role playing, why was it role playing? And I know that's a silly thing to say. That's not the question I'm trying to
But
answer. It's just a
the
really
question's
real quick.
genuine. The question's genuine.
Yeah,
It came
yeah,
up naturally.
yeah.
So
It's like
yeah.
why is this role playing, but that isn't role playing? Is role playing any activity whatsoever where for any measure of time I am put in an imaginary situation as an imaginary individual. Is that role play? Because that could be my work day as I sit there doing what I do, and I'm somewhere else as I'm doing it because it's a tedious task. Like that could be any number of things. So Well, you have to narrow it down from there, right? Well, no, it's not me just imagining something else while I'm doing my work. So it has to be intentional. I have to sit down with the intent to experience an imaginary world. And that's how I like to do things. I like to go from there. It's like, well, let's start broad and then let's drill down. But I have to ask myself the question every time I drill down, well, why? Why is drilling down in this particular fashion getting you more toward the framework that you're looking for? And it's, it's consumes a lot of time. It consumes a lot of brain power. I have pages and pages and pages of notes that I've written on this. Like, I have notes about, there's a sliding scale for role playing games, right? It's not a matter like the sliding scale goes from, zero,
Not at
uh,
all to
zero, yes, not at
100%.
all to all of it. And it's like, well, you already know that you can't go to the extreme in either direction, right? Because if you're sitting down to play a role playing game, you can't go all the way to zero because you were at least there to role play, right? So some role play is going to happen. Maybe it's very brief, maybe it's 30 minutes out of 4 hours. But at the same time, you can't immerse yourself completely because you're only ever going to be you, right? And so there's always going to be that barrier between who you're being and who you are. And so you're going to have to consider out of character, well, this dwarf comes from this city, is this far underground, they eat
What would the
this, they
character
do
do?
right. Right. So why would the character do this sort of thing? Is it a biological thing? Is it a cultural thing? So you're always going to be at least that removed from the character. So and then you start to question the whole thing. It's like, well, is it a sliding scale? Does there have to be a scale? Because you cut the extremes off automatically, right? And it's like, well, then what
None of
use
these are
is it?
role playing. Only this is role
Right,
play.
right. And so,
But then,
you know,
yeah, but then we get back to the, do I need to define, at this point, you know, 50 years on, do I need to define what role playing is
I,
compared to,
was I trying to
can't,
define wrong? Am I trying to define
I don't
wrong?
think, that you were. What I heard was that you were trying to identify the things that work for you,
Okay,
which doesn't need to have a label, because we're going to have this conversation anyway. This is what I was getting at earlier. What game are we going to play?
right.
Why are we going to play it? How are we going to play it? When are we going to play it? Who will and will not be present? Like, we're going to have the conversation regardless.
Yes.
So there's no need to say we're going to do a role playing game. And as everybody knows, a role playing game is these. And if you're not doing these, then you're not role playing. If you're not role playing, you
Right.
can't be part of the group. It's
Right.
just air. It's a waste of time, right? Because we're still going to have the conversation about
Right. And
what
then,
game we're going
and
to play and how we're going to play it.
right. And I was even having this conversation, not this conversation, but I was having a conversation with Ivan about how, and I don't know if you listened to the whole thing, but
Yep.
it's not, you can get a role playing game book and you can sit down at the table with other people and you can follow that book to the letter from cover to cover. And that does not mean you're role playing because role
Right.
playing doesn't come out of the book. Role playing is what you do at the table in the group setting with your created fiction, right?
Right.
Your
It's one,
collaborated fiction.
the
And
book
by the
is like
same
a person.
token,
Yeah.
right. And by the same token, like when I said Troll Babe is a story game, um, that was an incredibly unclear way of saying it's written to be stronger in a narrative sort of a play mode. That doesn't
Right.
mean
It's
you
going to
can't
help you
role
do
play it.
something. What is it going to help you do? Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't mean you can't role play it. You can role play, you could take a story game, take those rules, take that setting, take those systems, and role play it. Right. Just like you can take any role playing game. This is when I put it in quotes. That's what it says on the cover. It says role playing game on the cover. You can take
Yeah.
that game and turn it into a narrative game, right? People do it all the
Sure.
time.
All the time. Or a
So
tactical
it's
game or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
So role play
So,
becomes what you do at the table. And that,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't, and in other circles, not on my own channel, but on other people's channels, I have said repeatedly, when a book, when they're reviewing a book and it comes up, players should this, players shouldn't that. My gut reaction is always, don't tell me what to do, book. You can't tell me what to do. You're not at my table. You're not a player that I've agreed to sit down and play with, right? I will take from this book what I want. I will leave what I don't want. And that is going to be the end of the story. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to
It's
play.
interesting.
Likewise, right? I'm not going to tell anyone how to play. I'm not going to tell anyone what to do at their table. That's
Will you
not my
start the
goal.
conversation with your own group about how we are going to play?
Yes, but that's different because that's inclusive, right? This is a matter
Sure.
of coming together to identify an experience that we would like to participate in and how best to achieve that given the individuals at the table, the personalities, the systems we have available to us, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So that
Um,
can include the book as written or not
exactly.
at
When I
this
say I'm not
time,
going to tell
but
anyone
not
how to
that time.
play, right, right,
Yeah.
right. You're right. Depending on the situation, what I'm not going to do is stand here as an external observer and say, this is how you have to do it. This is how you not have to do it. That's what I mean when I say I'm not going to tell anyone how to play. Because I don't like when an external observer tells me what I need to do or what I don't need to do in order to play.
Right.
So,
And with your expectation that it's a personal experience in a group setting, most of the
yes,
personal experience is not observable anyway. So the
correct.
the external observer is operating with far less information than they need to make an informed opinion. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. All
So
right.
that's, what I'm
So I got
hoping
one last
to.
question.
Oh,
One
oh,
last
great.
question
Awesome.
for you, and then I will let you go back to your life. um, we've talked a little bit about imagination. We've talked about the importance of imagining things to the experience that at least we are looking for, you and I.
Yes.
Okay, so when you're playing a game, this is a difficult question, so I don't mind rephrasing it if it doesn't make sense at first.
Okay.
When you are imagining a situation in play,
Hmm.
how do you imagine it?
How do I imagine it? Like,
Right.
am I someone who can picture something in my mind's eye, or am I
There you
someone
go.
who can't do that? Okay, I picture it in my mind's eye.
All
So
right.
when I am given a we are descending stairs and we come into a large cavernous room, I'm the one who's thinking, okay, it is until I'm told otherwise, it is dry or damp. There are stalagmites. There are not stalagmites. Maybe there are flagstones. Maybe someone's been living in this before we got here. Maybe
Cool.
it's just a catacomb. So I am able to picture things in my mind's eye. Fortunately, I actually know people who can't.
Right.
Um, and that, I've not role played with them, but I know them. I know that they can't do that. So I'm thankful to
Okay.
be able to.
So is this experience of filling out those details that have not been stated,
Mm-hmm,
right? Because you mentioned importantly that until I'm told otherwise, because that's the next
mm-hmm.
part of the question, right? As those details are filling out in your mind's eye, in your imagination, is this coming to you unbidden, meaning they're in my mind's eye because they're things that should be there,
Mm-hmm.
or are they bidden into existence? I'm going to imagine stalactites because that's cool.
A little of column A, a little of column B.
Okay,
I
it's
will
not a
allow
either or proposition, right?
right. I will allow a flow state to take hold and just kind of build the dungeon in front of me. So imagine I'm in first person view. I can see my feet and my arms, and I can see things just sort of come into view in front of me. And then if I've imagined a damp cave and I'm told that it's actually sandy and dry with a wind blowing through it from an opening further down the cave, it just shifts, right? So it doesn't take me out of character. I don't
Okay.
sit here and think to myself, oh, why now I need to reconcile. I don't need to reconcile. I just allow it to shift.
Right.
Um,
Have you played
and
with people
so,
that retcon is jarring?
yeah, it gets difficult for some people for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and so, however, if I'm in a situation, right, and I'm told I'm entering a cave of some sort, and I immediately think, well, it's a damp cave with stalactites and stalagmites and et cetera, et cetera. I can sometimes stop myself and go, I've done that before. Let me go ahead and do a dry place. Let me go ahead. Let's do like a comfy, cozy, like an underground forest kind of nature thing. Like I can stop myself to do that. I will admit immediately that when I do that, I'm taken out of character.
Okay,
But
that's
but it
interesting.
doesn't stop me from doing it sometimes.
But you're still
Um,
able to enjoy the new vista that you've created for yourself.
yes,
It's just you're enjoying it differently.
yes, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
I think these are all really important questions, and I think they rarely get asked.
I would agree with that for sure. This is actually the second time that I've been asked this question this week. And prior to this week, I would say that I probably have never been asked this question at all. Well, I'll tell you what, there was one other time I've been asked the question, and that was when I was in the discovery process of it having been revealed to me that there are some people who don't have a mind's eye. So in that when because it was a conversation I had with a friend, he had discovered this fact. He was like, "Hey, my wife doesn't do she can't see things in her mind's eye. Can you see things in your mind's eye? Like when I say there's an apple on that table over there, imagine an apple. Can you see the apple in your mind?" So
Right.
he asked that question. The answer was yes. And now I'm being asked it twice in 1 week. And this is years later. I would say this is like 3 or 4 years later. So it's not a question that gets asked often. And I think
Right.
that it is an important one.
Because for me, like when I ask, what is it we do when we play? This is the thing. This is the detail I'm listening for because it's the one that doesn't like usually in conversation we get to, oh well, it's a it's a medium that exists only in verbal communication, so we have to be able to communicate clearly, and so that should include only character dialogue, or it should be character dialogue plus character action, or it should be character dialogue, character action, description. It should
Right.
be in character first person dialogue plus third person description. It should be third person omniscient description. There are all these variations that get talked about a lot.
Right.
But what do we do when we play? Or do we? Because I've played with people who can imagine the apple in tremendous detail, but don't. Has never occurred to them to play and imagine at the same time. I've met people that play through the mechanical aspects, and then when the situation is resolved, they think, oh, that would have been cool. Like they imagine it after the fact.
Ah, that is not
And
what happens to me.
yeah,
I have to
in
imagine
the
it in the
moment.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are one of the classic problems that I like to talk about is the person who imagines the situation all the way through to the end before it's been resolved. So then all of play is a painful retcon. I blow his head off. Okay, roll.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Well,
botched.
you don't blow its head off. Yeah, I have recent experiences of that. It's I think that it was actually I would say that the my biggest problem is the cue taking. And so I don't know how far to go in my description. I don't know when to pull up. I don't, you know what I mean? And so it's
And that will change with
unpracticed and
each
I need
group.
to realize that it will change with each group. And so, I am perfectly happy and comfortable to blame myself for a lack of experience or a lack of preference. Um, but I totally get that having gone too far and having to retcon it on the spot and being like, oh, that kind of you wince
Takes
a
us
little
out of
bit.
the
Yeah,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, yeah. But again, depending on the style of game that you've decided to play, you
Yeah, some
need
people never
to.
notice this aspect.
Well, I do.
Yeah, me too.
And I laud those people who never notice because they're able to do something. They're able to stay in character at times where I'm just not capable of doing it.
Well,
Um,
they might be in character. They might not. They might be in the moment, in the scene, right? They're picturing not them blowing the guy's head off, but the guy's head
gotcha.
being blown off. They're
I see.
really
Yes.
and then they gamble, right? They roll the dice and oh, it didn't happen. So what did happen? They want right.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely I stop at the it didn't happen and I'm immediately taken out. And this is
Yeah.
I think it's something that can be worked on, right? Like if you do it enough, you hone the craft, you hone the skill, it can be worked on. And I'm willing to put the effort in to
Yeah.
do that. But yeah, it can be rough getting that
Yeah.
retcon.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with me and weather the storm of these kind of
Well, thank you for the offer
questions.
to sit and do this. This is exactly the sort of thing that I wanted. When I put the offer out there, said, "Hey, let's talk about it. Tell me why I'm wrong. Let's have a conversation." And you were one of the first to speak up and say, "Hey, let's have a conversation." So I respect you and your channel a great deal. Um,
Thanks.
I really do enjoy the games that you've, especially the Call of Cthulhu. I really like Call of Cthulhu. I like Roll Under Percentile. I like Lovecraft. I like cosmic horror. We'll talk your ear off about it if you give me a chance. Um, so I will continue to watch those games
Cool.
with Ivan, Mike, and you. And I can't remember any of the other names of the individuals involved. Unfortunately, I
Yeah, we don't do a
apologize.
lot of, and on my right is, Ivan
Right,
Mike.
right.
Yeah,
But I really do enjoy those. I really enjoy the channel, like I said, and I have great respect for what you've done and what you're doing. And I'm very
thanks.
happy to have had this opportunity.
Well, that's the reason why I leapt at the chance to talk with you about your ideas, because, like I said at the beginning, I really appreciate the process you're putting yourself through to look at your own ideas. And that's another thing I think that doesn't get talked about enough, just generally, is how to think about how I think.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
uh, I definitely wanted to connect with someone that takes that seriously. So hopefully we can do this again.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. I would love to.
Cool. All right. Everyone, take care.